Lost Art with Andrew Cox, retired Master Gunnery Sergeant. thelostart.podbean.com. Get some merchandise and help support the podcast in getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. Now on all major podcast platforms. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be a guest, tell your veteran story, discuss your veteran business or organization. Email The Lost Art with Andrew Cox at gmail.com. Andrew Cox, a Till Valhalla Project Ambassador. See the project story at tillvalhallaproject.com. Thanks for tuning in. Please enjoy the podcast that's giving a voice to our veterans. The Lost Art with Andrew Cox.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Lost Art Podcast, that podcast giving a voice to our veterans. I'm your host, Andrew Cox, and today we're having a My Veteran Story. But before we get in the episode, are you enjoying the podcast? And go to the Lost Art website. That's the lostart.podbean.com. Go check us out, see what we got going on. We do have a merchandise tab. You can click on that. Go get you a hat, a shirt, a mug, get you something cool. Help support us in getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. Also, a big shout out to the Till Valhalla Project and allowing me to be an ambassador for that great organization. If you don't know anything about them, go to their website. That's tillvalhallaproject.com. Go check them out. They are doing some amazing things. And if you can help support them, please do so. All right. With that, I have Onsby Rose here. So how you doing?
Good, man. It's a beautiful, chilly Iowa morning this morning in Iowa, so all is well.
Yeah. When you say chilly, what are we talking here?
I think when I left the house this morning, 35-ish.
35. Yeah, that's definitely chilly. I'm sitting out here outside in a short sleeve shirt and just enjoying the nice cool breeze here in Virginia Beach. Definitely not as cold.
No, not at all. We're getting into that time of year. It's part of what I love about here is the change of seasons. I love the summertime, of course, because I'm a fisherman, but I also love the wintertime because I'm a fisherman. So
Now you get to do some cool ice fishing up that way, don't you?
we do, yeah. It usually things stay frozen over right here in my general area, sometime beginning of January through usually the end of February, beginning of March. But if you go
Wow.
a couple hours north into Minnesota, like last year, I took my boys and we went up to Lake of the Woods, and you can easily ice fish up there until sometimes mid-April.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, it freezes over thick.
Yeah, that's crazy. Huh. Well, hey, we're gonna jump into this if you're ready, and then
Sure.
let's just kind of start at the beginning, right? Where
Okay.
you grew up, what was that like, and then kind of what drew you eventually into the military?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I won't go into my younger years too much because there's not much there that's interesting, but I was actually born in Michigan, right outside
Okay.
of Detroit in a little suburb called Royal Oak. Don't tell my Ohio State friends that. Hopefully they won't hold that against me. But yeah, my parents were separated and divorced, unfortunately, when I was young. Both of them were from Virginia, so my mom and I moved back to Virginia. We lived in a tiny little town called Hayside. Most people have probably never heard of it. If you blink, you'll miss it on the way through. It's over in the southwestern corner. You could be in Kentucky in an hour. You could be in Tennessee in an hour, kind of over on
Oh,
that edge.
wow.
Definitely deep in Appalachia, coal country. We
Hmm.
spent most of my growing up years there till I was in about the sixth grade. And then we moved to the big city of Abingdon, Virginia, which is not a big city at all, but to me it was. And I spent the rest of my high school years there. After I graduated high school, I knew that I wanted to stay in music. And I at that time I said, I want to be a teacher. So I went to the University of South Carolina as a music education major,
Okay.
and had some great times there. Did well, but I was ready for college, but not really ready for real life yet.
Mm.
So I had talked to a Marine Corps recruiter when I was a senior in high school, and had strongly considered joining the Marine Corps and going into the band at that point. But I did have that burning desire to teach, so I went ahead and went to college. But about 3 years into my undergraduate, it was time to do something else. But I didn't want to get out of music. I had to have a job.
Yeah.
So I'll never forget. I was on my way home one summer. I had moved to Columbia full time, and saw a Marine Corps recruiting poster and said, you know what? I think I'm going to swing by the recruiting station and talk to the guys here and see what's up. And sure enough, spoke to them, and about, I guess it took about 3.5, 4 months. I went in the DEP program. About 4 months later, I was on a van to Parris Island, South Carolina. Uh,
Holy cow. That's
so
a quick
yeah, it was
transition.
it was very interesting. it's not something I really planned, but I look back on it and I'm, thankful to God that's what happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, January 27th, if I remember correctly, my feet hit Paris Island, and
Okay.
I was
What
there.
year was that?
That would have been 1997.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got you. All right.
97. And I was there for a little bit longer than initially planned because I went to what we all affectionately know as the pork chop platoon. Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
the listeners that don't know what that is, it's technically the physical conditioning platoon. I was overweight, couldn't do any pull-ups. I was your typical college student musician at the time, but as the Marine Corps does, they got me into shape, and 16 weeks later, I graduated and proudly pinned on my Eagle Globe and Anchor.
So,
What
real quick, what company were you with in boot
I
camp?
was with Second Battalion Golf Company.
Golf. Okay.
Yep,
Gangster
Second
golf.
Battalion
Is that what
Golf.
they were?
Yeah, I think, and now after the fact, I found out that the drill instructors call it gunny golf or something because that's where they dump all the gunnies. And
Oh,
my
yeah.
senior drill instructor was a gunnery sergeant. Now I look back, I was like, yep, that makes sense.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, I was right there, right off the main parade deck in Paris Island. We used to go over to the parade deck often to practice drill and stuff.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your experience in boot camp for you. Like, was it an easy experience? Was it like what was
No,
going
not at
on?
all. I
Okay.
mean, as we all know, once you get beyond the mental part of it and you understand that your body can do a lot more than what we really think it can,
Yeah.
it's the mental part that was the most difficult for me going in. It took a few weeks for me to get used to being, yelled at and run around and doing everything quickly, and I just never experienced that before. I mean, my mom and dad were very strict, and we had a regimen of the way things were at home, but it wasn't like that.
Right.
So after I finally kind of settled into that, and going to PCP actually was a huge help with that because I had 4 weeks of nothing but getting into shape and being treated like a first phase recruit before I was actually a first phase recruit. So
Wow.
by the
Yeah.
time that I got to my training platoon, it was old hat, and I was just like, okay, this is life, and that's how, and I knew how to deal with it.
Hmm.
They didn't find out I was a musician until about 2 weeks into my actual training cycle, and
Oh,
then
okay.
I'll never forget Sergeant Whitehead. He was our third hat, and he found out that I was going in the band. He was like, "What's going on with you, Rose? You're gonna be a staff sergeant when you leave here." I was like, "No, no, 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 sir. That's the president's own. That's not where I'm going." And I think he finally gathered that, but he ended up being one of my favorites by the end. I really respected him. He ingrained a lot of discipline into me. So yeah, it was definitely hard. I was not a physical person when I joined the Marine Corps. I
Yeah.
was typical, musician. I practiced 2 or 3, 4 hours a day. I was studious, I made okay grades, but I was not out hitting the bricks every morning or anything like that. So that was
Hmm.
that was challenging for me. But after I got into the sequence of it, and I started to lose some weight, of course things became easier and easier. And then luckily through my career, I was able to stay in really good shape and kept up the physical training pretty easily.
Yeah. Very nice.
So
Wow.
after boot camp, I did what all of us as in the bands do, and went to the Armed Forces School of Music. Checked in there. Let's see, it would have been late summer. And
Hmm.
since I had been to university for 3.5 years prior, luckily I was already fairly well into the knowledge that I needed to attain there. So I
Right.
was able to play an incoming audition that allowed me to be considered for accelerated graduation, which
Okay.
is ends up what's happened. I took my theory and my ear training tests, and then also stayed long enough to get my chops back after boot camp, and left the School of Music with my, at the time it was a 4.0 scale with my 3.0 on my instrument, and
Hmm.
graduated early and checked into the Marine Band in Albany, Georgia, in
Okay.
would
Very
have been
nice.
mid to early October of 1997. That was
Okay.
my first band. I remember checking in there. We all know Gunny Money. He kept giving
Yeah.
me the training there at the School of Music on what to do to check into my band. And I remember driving on base and trying to find a head somewhere so that I could go put my uniform on without sitting down in it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had a great couple years in Albany. Learned a lot there. Served with some really really great Marines that I learned a tremendous amount from. After a couple years in Albany, I decided that what we do in the Marine Corps with the bands, especially at that time, is very ceremonial oriented.
Hmm.
And I thought, what, I enjoy this, the marching and everything, but if I'm going to do that, how about I look at going to the Commandant's Zone, the Marine Drum and Bugle Corps, because that's, of
Hmm.
course, they're a 100% marching unit. So I was coming up middle of my enlistment, and luckily the Marine Corps allowed me to audition for them, and then I did a lateral move to the 9900 MOS. 9911,
Okay.
I think, is at the time anyway, was the Drum Corps MOS. And I went
Real quick,
to, yeah,
what was your instrument? And because I think it's trombone, correct? Is
I
that
was a
right?
trombone player in the band, and so
Okay.
in the Drum Corps I played baritone bugle.
Got
Uh,
it. Okay.
so at the time we were still playing the two valve G's, which I think they're still on G's, but I think they have three valve horns now. But yeah, so and they actually, because of the way that bugles worked and everything, they actually did my audition on trombone. And once they
Oh,
see
no
a
kidding.
competent musician, that they're it's fairly certain that you can transfer that over to the valved instrument. And with my
Hmm.
background as a music ed major, I had a lot of that knowledge and skills already anyway. Uh,
Right.
so yeah, I went to DC for a couple years, which was again another great tour. I met some great friends there. In fact, one of my closest friends ever, his name was Tim Ryan. We served together there in the drum corps. He eventually got commissioned and went off to fly helicopters, and
Oh, wow.
unfortunately was killed in Iraq in 2003. But
Hmm.
one of my very close friends, as well as numerous others. I could name off a lot of names, but I look back on it now. It's kind of interesting because I was actually serving at the barracks right as Colonel Bourgeois was finishing up his last couple years with the President's Own.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I've run into him from time to time, and surprisingly, much to his credit, the first time I ran into him, this was at least a decade after I had seen him as both of us on active duty at the barracks. I ran into him and I said, "Sir, I'm sure you don't remember me." He's like, "No, I absolutely do. Corporal Rose, right?"
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
really? I was blown away. Yeah, so that's the kind of Marine he is and was. So, but yeah, a couple years there, and then after that, if you know much about the DC units, it's kind of a Groundhog Day after a while. It's a lot of the
Mm.
same year after year, although still great experiences. But decided, I'd like to go back to the fleet and get back on trombone. So. At that time, the Marine Corps had a Marine Corps order that said at the end of your first enlistment, if there's openings in any MOS and you're qualified, you can lat move to that MOS. So I did a lateral
Oh,
move back to
wow.
the 5500 field. Um,
Okay.
and much thanks to at the time the head of Marine Corps music at was at Quantico at the time, now at the Pentagon, was Chief Officer Roxanne Haskell.
Hmm.
She was the head of the music area at that time, and she was actually getting ready to rotate back out to the fleet, and she was going to Marine Band New Orleans as the OIC there. So I was originally planning to go to Quantico because I lived in Stafford at the time. I thought, great,
Yeah.
I don't even have to do a PCS. But she taught me into going to New Orleans, which I'm glad she did. That was a great tour there. Did 3.5, right at 4 years in New Orleans. Great times. Probably the highlight of my tour there was I was not only was I the travel chief and handled all the travel operations for the band, I got to do a little drum majoring, a little bit of enlisted conductor stuff. But my big thing was I was a small ensemble leader. I led our brass
Mm.
quintet. And we traveled literally all over the world. I took them for 2.5 weeks for a Southern Germany tour while I was there.
Wow.
And yeah, just I think we hit something like 35 or something of the 50 states. A lot of recruiting tours, a lot of community relations tours. It was a blast. And the cool thing was it was like all of my best friends in the unit, and we all got to travel together. So what a great
Very
experience
cool.
that was. Made staff sergeant towards the end of my tour there. And at that point, I was like, I really need to finish this degree thing. So I put in for and was selected for the staff degree completion program,
Oh,
and
nice. Yeah.
went back to school at East Tennessee State University for 18 months, finished up my degree. Funny how that, we all as Marines, we stay so connected. The director of bands at East Tennessee State at the time was Roxanne Haskell. She had just retired
Oh, no kidding.
from the Marine Corps a couple years earlier. So yeah, did that, finished my degree, and then from there went to the School of Music and did various jobs for a couple years as a repayment for the Marine Corps,
Mm.
allowing me to go back to school. I served as a registrar for a bit, taught some ensemble things, and helped out at the time it was the Marine. Well, no, I think it was the Marine Detachment by then. I think they had changed it from element to detachment. the Marine
Okay.
management as best I could. Got to serve with Matt Boatwright there, whom is
Mm-hmm.
definitely in my list of top 5 list of the finest Marines that I've ever served with, and learned a ton from both him as well as Master Gunny Farquhar. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I don't mean to name drop, but these are just people that were just incredibly important in my career. And I
Yeah, 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 for
wouldn't be
sure.
able to do what I do now had it not been for them.
Yeah.
Um, at the end of that tour, it was time. I had 2 kids by that time, and got out of the Marine Corps. Stayed in Norfolk briefly because I got out, and I joke with my students now that I've always been a conductor. I was just a conductor of a different kind for a couple of years. I got out and worked for the railroad.
Oh,
Um,
no kidding.
yeah, so when I got out of the Corps, I was like, it was in October of '07, and not a good time to get a teaching gig. And I thought, what can I do? Like, what am I qualified to do? And I'd always had this love of trains growing up. I thought, you know what the heck? I'm going to apply for the railroad. So I applied for Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern and CSX, and I got an interview with UP in Minnesota and actually got offered the job, but they wanted me to start training like 3 days before I was technically on EAS because I worked all
Oh,
the way
yeah.
to the last day. And I just couldn't do it. I was like, and they were like, well, we'll put you in the next class. But in the meantime, Norfolk Southern called me and their timeline worked much better. So I ended up going with them. Uh,
Okay.
Long story short, there spent 5 years with the railroad, first couple in the trade as a conductor. And actually my middle 2 years, I was a supervisor. And then I transferred to Canadian Pacific for a couple of years before that, I kind of finished my railroad career. I got laid off from the railroad, would have been in early 2012. And again, back to Gunny Mummy, it's that Marine Corps connection. He had since retired and was working for a company, the Genesee and Wyoming Railroad. They've got little short line railroads all over the United States. And
Yeah.
I got laid off. I reached out to him and said, hey, do you know if any of your places have any openings? I'm qualified as a conductor. And within 2 days, he had me a job.
Oh,
So
wow.
we moved to Tennessee, would have been summer of 2012, and I started work with the GNW. They had a place in Tennessee where they switched out the Eastman chemical plant.
Mm-hmm.
Did that for about 3 months, and unfortunately, during that time, my late wife had some pretty deep depression issues, and she unfortunately took her life in October 2012.
Mm.
So at that point, I had 4 kids. My youngest was not quite 14 months old yet, and I was a single
Wow.
dad literally overnight. Luckily, where we lived was only about an hour and 15 minutes from my parents, the rest of my family. So that was a huge safety net. So I immediately, of course, took a little time off to deal with the fallout from that. And through God's graces, had a colleague reach out to me and said, "Hey, are you still looking for a band director job?" I was like, well, I'm looking for any job that I can do that I can be home general normal hours for my boys because it's just me now. And he said, well, I hear that Hampton High School needs a band director, and this was in October. So, I wasn't really thinking about getting a teaching job, but I said, well, I'll reach out to him. So I did, and sure enough, 2 weeks later, I was standing in the high school band room as the high school and middle school band director at Hampton High School. 2 weeks later, there I am, the high school band director. I was, 20 years later or 15 years later, whatever it was, than I had planned on whenever I first started school. But that was kind of a godsend for me. It was actually the first year I was there on a temporary basis. I was basically a long-term substitute teacher.
Right.
The next year, I went through an official interview and they hired me. Did that for a couple of years, and that was really good. We actually moved back to Abingdon, Virginia, which was a good 45-minute drive from where I taught. But thankfully, my parents being there, my mom actually helped provide basically my child care for me because I wasn't making a ton of money and stuff like that at the time. And it was good for
And
the kids to get to spend time with my mom and my stepdad as well.
and you were teaching high school band, is that
High
right?
school and middle school, yeah. I taught
Okay,
sixth
both. Okay.
grade beginners all the way through 12th grade. Had a couple of really good years there. I still keep in contact with a number of the students that I had in my high school group there, or that many of them I started in like when they were beginners in the sixth grade, and now they're grown adults out, doing
Yeah.
in life. So yeah, I did that for a couple years, and in the meantime, while I was teaching there, I happened to run into an old friend on Facebook. We had served together in the Marine Band in New Orleans,
Hmm.
She did one enlistment, flute player, and I had talked to her in the past. We literally didn't even know each other's first names, and she actually had a personal rule on social media that she was not friends with men unless she knew their wives. The only exception to that is if you were a Marine that she had served with.
Oh, wow.
Because she did not know my late wife. We only overlapped by about a year when we served together in New Orleans. And I'd seen her a couple times since she had been out. I reached out to her because it had been, gosh, 10 years. I was like, hey, what's going on? About 2 days later, I finally got a response. I assumed she doesn't want to talk to me or whatever. And literally, it was completely platonic. I was just thinking, hey, how you doing there, fellow Marine? And she responded to me and said, I'm doing okay. And then kind of told me what had been going on in her life for the past years. And come to find out, she was no longer married. And
Oh, wow. Okay.
at the point in my life where, when my first wife passed, I thought, okay, that's it. I'll probably spend the rest of my life alone. And
Yeah.
I don't say that in a negative way. I just thought, I've got 4 boys to raise. I need to sink my time into them, and I'm not worried about, finding another spouse or anything. But I was
Hmm.
at a point in my life whenever Jesse and I started talking that I was like, you know what? I really don't want to spend my life alone. It's meant to be shared with someone. Uh,
Yeah.
and again, try to make a long story short, we chatted on social media quite a bit. We found out that both of us were very devout Christians, and our faith was incredibly important to us in our lives. And then finally, on a whim, I just thought, you know what, I need to ask this lady out. She's just too nice not to. And I invited her to be my date to my 20th class reunion.
Oh,
And
wow.
sure enough, she did. She came down and brought her son, Caleb, who now my stepson, and my mom watched the kids for us. And we went to my 20th class reunion that night. And we joke about it now because that was technically our first date, but I introduced her to my friends as my girlfriend, which I
Oh,
guess I
wow.
was making a bit of a too big of an assumption, but luckily it worked out for me in the long run. Uh, and there's lots of funny stories with how we ended up together. But anyway, we were married about a year or so later. Um,
Okay.
and at that time, I had been accepted. I had auditioned and accepted a graduate assistantship at Appalachian State University to do my master's degree in wind conducting. And we moved to Boone, North Carolina. And she went from being a mom of one to being a mom of five. And I
Mm.
went from being, a single dad of four to having this instant family again. And it was probably one of the most joyful things in my life. There were some trials and triumphs, as you can imagine, with combining families and getting used
Oh,
to
yeah.
everything working together. But our 5 boys, my 4 biological children, and my stepson, you would never know that they were not all biological brothers. They grew up together. They fight and scratch like biological brothers would, and but they're all there for each other as well. So that was a very positive thing. And then about halfway through my master's degree, I was getting ready to turn 40 years old. And I went home one night and I said, I really like this college teaching gig. Like this is pretty cool. Your schedule is much more flexible. You have a much more control over it. I said, I'd really like to look into doing that, but it's pretty much a written rule nowadays that in order to teach at the college level, you've got to have a doctorate. And that's not
Wow.
something I ever thought was not only possible, but it just never crossed my mind. But suddenly it did. I was like, if I'm going to do this, it's kind of like it's time to, water, get off the pot.
Yeah.
So I thought, and luckily my wife was crazy enough in love with me that she said, you know what, if that's what you want to do, we'll figure out how to make it happen. So
Nice.
again, applied, did some auditions, and was blessed to be accepted as a doctoral graduate assistant at the Ohio State University, where I studied with Russ Mickelson, whom is just an incredible man. I learned so much from him, and spent 3 years there. During that time, I started to dabble in composition a little bit. David Maslanka became a close friend of mine over the last 7 or 8 years that he was alive, and I was writing my dissertation on his 10th symphony, that was the plan. He was beginning to work on it. And he asked me if I would be willing to learn what he does from the inside out rather than writing about it from the outside in. And I said, sure, I'm not a composer, but It doesn't hurt to learn. That can only help me. And I did. And basically what that did was it taught me that, yeah, I actually do have some music in me that might be valuable to people. And I started writing on my own. The first piece I wrote was called Heroes from the Sea. And it was premiered by the President's Own, which when you're lucky enough, like I was, to get your first ever wind band piece premiered by the finest band in the world, it immediately gets people's attention, and that's what it.
Yeah.
I do have to give a huge shout out to Colonel Jason Fettig, whom is now retired,
Hmm.
director bands at Michigan. It's a huge risk for somebody in that prominent of a position to take a risk on this unknown composer, doctoral graduate assistant that's wrote this, 2.5 minute fanfare and play it. You don't know what you're going to get, but he did, and I attribute a large part of my composition career success to the fact that he did that.
Oh
So
yeah,
yeah,
that's really cool.
got that played. It originated actually as a brass and percussion fanfare that I won the Dallas Winds fanfare competition in 2017, I think it was.
Okay.
Then I scored it for full wind band. Jason did it with the Marine Band, and then after that, it kind of began to snowball from there. Um, the Air Force Band reached out to me and said, because the Heroes from the Sea was a piece that was written specifically for the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Coast Guard. Those
Yeah.
those services that are seaborne U.S. services. But Larry Lang mentioned, he said, it'd be really cool if you could write a movement for the Air Force. Thought, okay, that'd be cool. At the time, I had gotten to know Frank Kelly pretty well, and his recommendation was, you should turn it into a suite. You could have one for the naval services, one for the air services, and one movement for the ground forces. And I thought that you're absolutely right. That's a great idea. So I started to
Mm.
work on that, and a number of other folks, both military bands, civilian bands, and a lot of university and high school bands were willing to jump on and say, yeah, we'll pay X number of dollars to be part of this consortium to commission this full work. Um, Heroes from the Sea was the first movement of what ended up being Symphony Number One. And as I was writing, though, what I discovered was as I wrote each movement, so movement one was already written here. I basically call it from the Sea is the title in the symphony. Movement
Hmm.
two was from the air for the Air Force, and of course there are other air forces, but for all of our military air forces. And then movement three was from the ground, and it was for primarily the Army and the ground forces. But the Marine Corps, of course, has ground forces, as do many of the
Yeah.
services. But what I discovered when I was writing is that it wasn't complete. There was something missing, and the way that I compose relies very heavily on prayer. Whenever I
Hmm.
write music before each session, I talk to God about what it is that needs to come into existence as far as the oral part of it.
Hmm.
And as I did that with this piece, what I realized was is that what was missing was a tribute to those that we've lost. Um,
Mm.
as I mentioned earlier, I served with a gentleman by the name of Tim Ryan when I was in the Drum and Bugle Corps. He went off to fly helos and was unfortunately killed overseas in 2003. So he was a big part of that as I thought about him, as well as I have other people that I've known through my time, both in the Marine Corps and since, that have lost their lives in war. And
Yeah.
but there has to be something there. So I added a fourth movement to it and called that For the Fallen.
Mm.
That's ended up being actually the most popular of the four. It's probably gotten the most play. It's hard to play an entire symphony. That work in and of itself is about 24 minutes long in total.
Oh
So that's
wow.
a big undertaking for any ensemble. So oftentimes they'll perform one or two movements of it. The President's Own recently did Heroes from the Sea when they were here. And they've done For the Fallen on a number of different concerts as well as other bands. So yeah, I ended up doing that, wrote that, got it out. It's been performed many, many times. That prompted me to fortunately be approached by Murphy Music Press, which is whom distributes all of my music now. And long story short, there's a lot of composition stories I could talk about, but long story short, and at this time, I think I've got about 22 published compositions that are out being performed currently. And I've got about a 2-year waiting list for commissions right now.
Oh
Um,
wow.
my big one is, of course, I'm completing. My deadline's December 1st, so I'm pushing right up to the last minute. But I am completing my second symphony for the President's Own, the U.S. Marine Band.
Oh, wow.
And it began as Ryan Nallen was the associate director at the time, right before Jason
Hmm.
retired. They were out here on tour, and he approached me and said, they would like to commission a new work for the commemoration of the 250th birthday of the Marine Corps,
Oh, yeah.
which is next year, as we all know. So I said,
Hmm.
yeah, that'd be great. And he basically gave me a blank sheet of paper. He said, it can be whatever you want. He said, whatever you
Wow.
write, I will program around that. So if you want to write a 5 minute piece, we're okay with it. If you want to write a 30-minute piece, we're okay with it. I have been chomping at the bit for the last few years to write another symphony because I feel that I've got another symphony in me. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I said, are you willing, if I'm willing to write a symphony, is that okay? And he said, absolutely. You do what you need to do. So again, in the beginnings of planning that, went to God in prayer to find out, how is it that I can make this valuable to our community of Marines, but also I want it to be valuable beyond that. I want it to be valuable to humanity as music. Um, so what I eventually came up with is that the title of the new symphony is The Sacred Cloth. And
Mm.
us as Marines, we can probably know very quickly what that goes to. It obviously refers to our dress blue uniform. Uh,
Yeah.
but the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized that although this symphony will celebrate the 250th birthday of the Marine Corps and the sacred cloth that is our uniform, everybody in this world has a sacred cloth.
Hmm.
It takes all professions for our world to operate, whether you are a custodian or whether you are a railroad conductor, whether you are a U.S. Marine, whatever it is, everyone, if you think about it, my dad was a truck driver. And I
Yeah.
distinctly in my mind, and this vision came to me when I was trying to design what this symphony would be about. I can remember him going to work and him having his blue button-down shirt, short sleeve button-down shirt on with the name tag that said Ronnie on the side, and the
Yeah.
other side it had the thing that had the company that he worked for. That was his sacred cloth because that's what
Hmm.
provided for his family. And it not only provided for his family monetarily, but it provided for those other family. He drove a gas tanker, so the people that
Hmm.
pull their vehicles up to go to work. So that's really ultimately in the large grand scheme of things of what this is about. Yes, it's about the Marine Corps and our 250 years of just the incredible fighting force that it is. But I think we can all tie into that in that we all have a sacred cloth. My sacred cloth now in my current life, I guess would be my tuxedo because I'm a college
Yeah.
band director, and that's kind of what people identify with the concerts. So yeah, that's sorry to go on so long about that, but that's kind of my trek through life and what brought me here.
Yeah. Which is incredible, by the way. Just writing music and not everybody can do it. I can't do it. I'm not talented enough to do anything like that. But just writing music alone, whether it's like an intro or you're just changing some stuff up or whatever,
Right.
that in itself is a huge undertaking. And you're talking a symphony, which you're talking, anywhere 20, 30-minute type of works. Man, that's some hours and hours and hours you're spending trying to kind of piece it all together.
It is, yeah, it's very intricate. People ask me all the time how much time I spend writing, and I've tried to kind of calculate it and as close as I can get because it's definitely not a science. Is on average, I probably spend between 20 and 30 hours for every minute of music that I write. Um,
Holy cow.
and that encompasses, I mean, there's times when I literally just sit down by myself in my bedroom or wherever, and I spend 2 hours just in my headspace trying to figure out what this is, and design
Yeah.
the flow of it, much like I would assume I've never written a novel, but I would assume the way that someone that writes novels do. Uh,
Yeah.
and then, a lot of it, well, not a lot of it, all of it has to do with my faith. My firm belief is that the music is not truly mine.
Yeah.
I'm the lucky guy that gets to play it in the piano and put it into the computer and notate it. But I truly do believe that the music is divinely inspired, and that I'm just the medium that God uses in order to bring that music into His world. And
Yeah.
what an honor to be able to be used by our God for something as meaningful as that. So that's kind of the way I look at it. He gives me the notes that He wants to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. You talking about that and faith and God, I started a new segment called Men of Faith.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome.
so those are posting on Wednesday now, but
Nice.
yeah, just started. We've had 2 episodes of that, and it's just guys getting together and having fellowship and talking about being men and how that works in life type of thing. You are more than welcome to join that anytime.
I would love to.
We record those Tuesday evenings at 7 Eastern.
Okay.
But I can shoot you the link, all that type of stuff. But it's a pretty cool thing that I literally just started. So we've had
That's
2
great.
episodes. So
That's great. Iron sharpening iron. That's what it's all about. I've got a great group of men here through my church here locally that, we get together and not only talk about faith issues, but we just get together and be guys and
yeah,
enjoy each other's company. And the ladies join us sometimes too. It's a great community. I think it's very important to have that.
yeah, especially man, I wish I could remember the name of this book, but Um, it talks about men and just that camaraderie or that brotherhood or whatever that you have or that you need. Men need that,
Right.
which is it's a really good book, but I cannot think of the name of it off the top of
That's
my head.
awesome. If you think of it, shoot
Yeah.
me a text and let me know. I'd love to look into it.
Yeah, for sure. I will. It won't take me long. I just got to get my phone real quick to find it. But
Sure.
so I want to go back to some of your Marine Corps experiences and how those experiences have kind of helped shape you in your life after the military.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard to put your fingers on all of the individual things, but as we all know, the discipline had a lot to do with it. And I wasn't an
Hmm.
undisciplined human being before the Marine Corps, but I definitely was not organized. I didn't think about things in the same manner that I think about them now. I didn't plan things out. I mean, in fact, funny story, just the other day, I send out an email at the beginning of every week to each of my ensembles that I direct here at the university. And it's basically just a rehearsal plan for the week. Hey, here's our rehearsal days. This is what we're going to rehearse. This is the times we're going to rehearse it so that
Yeah.
they can be planned. And I had thought about this before, but basically I do that in a SMEAC setting.
Oh, nice.
For
Yeah.
the viewers that don't understand, SMEAC is situation, mission, execution, admin and logistics, and command and control. It's basically five paragraph order so that you know that you have all of your bases covered.
Hmm.
But that email specifically, I normally don't do this, but I put it in that format. I listed situation, blah blah blah, mission, blah blah blah, and a couple of the students mentioned it to me and got a good kick out of it because they had, of course, never seen it like that. But that's a big part of what I am, and I don't often think about it in that way. That just happened to pop into my mind. But that's a large part of what the Marine Corps gave me, is that
Yeah.
organization of this is how you do things in a particular way so that you don't miss things, so that you don't
Hmm.
drop the ball. When I was stationed in New Orleans, as I mentioned, I was the travel chief, took care of all of our orders to travel, all of our travel arrangements. I was actually an assistant bus driver at the time, helped drive our bus when we traveled as well. And I remember over one Thanksgiving, I had Marines, I think it was in 27 different airports over the course of 4 days, because we had all of our small ensembles that were
Oh,
uh,
wow.
all over the country going places. And I had basically that five paragraph order, except it was about that thick.
Hmm.
I could take it into our OIC and explain exactly what every Marine was doing at every moment of time over the course of those days that we were going to be doing those things. And I think
Hmm.
that's one of the biggest things that helped me. The other thing is learning, and I still struggle with this, as we all do, I think, at times, but learning that in my position here, in my position in the Marine Corps, at whatever level you are, you give your input, and you give your input to those that are your supervisors or your leaders above you. They take that input and pass it on to their superiors, and ultimately it gets to somebody that makes a decision. And
Hmm.
sometimes that decision may not be what I would have agreed with, but the important part of it is that when that decision comes back down, that you execute that and you execute it to the best of your abilities, no matter how your personal feelings is. And I think our world struggles with that nowadays. As we look at politics and stuff like that, it's like, okay, we can all agree to disagree, or we can disagree, but when the rubber meets the road, once the decision's made, we need to all put our full effort into it. And
Yeah.
that was one of the big things. And then, of course, I guess if I had to have a third one, and this is probably the most important one, is the connections that I made.
Mm.
I've been out of the Marine Corps for almost 20 years now, and I
Wow.
still know 75% of the band officers in the fleet, and a number of, especially their staff and COs, but most of the guys of my era have retired and moved on. But
Yeah.
because of those close connections, I've gotten the opportunity, of course, to write for a number of the fleet bands as well. it's been tremendous. I owe my career to the Marine Corps. I owe everything I do to the Marine Corps. Every interview I've ever taken, one of the first things they ask me about is my military service, because on my resume, of course, I list it.
Hmm.
And I can talk about, how that has shaped me as a human being. But those are the things that primarily, I think, there's so many. I could talk for weeks about what the Marine Corps gave me. Every individual Marine. There's a retired master sergeant. His name's Tim Merklinger. He lives out in Montana now. That I think I got the worst butt chewing I received in my entire Marine Corps career from him. But I look back at it now and I'm like, man, I'm so glad he's a gunny at the time. I'm glad that Gunny Merck did that, because I learned a huge lesson at that time. I didn't know all my memorized music as well as I should have.
Yeah.
I learned that you take care of business.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very true. It's amazing that the individuals that I talk with, like you and other people, and how much they uh, talk about their military service and how it has helped them throughout their life.
Absolutely.
And what you're doing is, I mean, just perfect example of that, which is fantastic. One of the things that you're hitting on, um, when you say, once the decision's made, you take it and you run with it and you execute it to the best of your ability.
Right.
Uh, and I always looked at it as, once that decision's made, I execute it as if I made that decision and it's my plan.
Exactly
And
right.
and a lot of times, especially you mentioned leaders in politics and stuff like that, that nobody takes it as if it's their own and runs with it,
Right.
which is,
Unfortunately.
yeah, unfortunate. Yeah. But and our political climate is all kinds of jacked up right now. So,
For sure. For sure.
but
So yeah, that just has informed my life. Um, in both personal, professional, the whole nine yards, and just the adapt and overcome. I mean, it's all ingrained in us in Marines. The fail is not in our vocabulary.
very true, very true. And if you don't mind, I'd like to spend a little bit of time just kind of talking about with your wife that had the
Mhm.
committed suicide at that point. If you don't
Sure.
mind, kind of talking a little bit to that, because that is a huge thing that I do at the end of every podcast, is talk about
Okay.
one, veteran suicide.
Veteran suicide, right.
Yeah, but it's, and suicide altogether. If you don't mind, do you mind sharing a little bit of that?
No, I don't mind at all. I will happily, or not happily, but I will easily admit that it's an uncomfortable subject, and it's never good. That has been over 10 years ago when she passed. Yeah, I mean, after I got out of the Corps in '07, between '07 and the time that she passed was about 5 years. And of course, getting out of the military, that has a certain amount of stress to it. And then we moved a couple of times for my civilian employment. That has some stress to it. She had actually had an accident when she was younger, and was her back was injured, and that created some health challenges that she had to be on lots of different medications. I believe that contributed some to her depression. But
Hmm.
yeah, the last couple of years before she passed, she just really fell into a very deep depression. And then, of course, we had just had our fourth child, and I think, again, none of this is medical or scientifically known. This is just my assumptions. But I think that maybe postpartum had some to do with that. Of course, that manifested itself and added it to her depression.
Right.
And I think she just got to a point that she didn't feel like she could go on. We didn't really talk about it. She had had some bumps in the road over the last year or so before that, where we were trying to get some counseling, and she was working on those things. But I didn't have any reason to believe that she was serious about harming herself or anything like that. And we had gotten to a point where we were unfortunately going through some really challenging times in our marriage as well. Um,
Yeah.
there had been some infidelity and things like that, and we were not on my half, but we were working through that.
Mhm.
And I believed, my dad taught me when I was growing up that when you're married, once you get married, that you're married for life. Um,
Yeah.
and I felt like no matter what happened, that it was for me to work through. So even though we had had some of those unfortunate occurrences, I thought, you know what? I married this woman. I did love her deeply, and still do to this day. But I felt, we need to work through this. Divorce was not something that I was really uh, into. Um,
Hmm.
We were right before she passed. We were separated only for a day or so, just because it was a point where I knew she was struggling with the depression, and to try to encourage her to get help. I said, until that we can get until we can get you some really good help and we can kind of get you back in a stable state, I think that, I should take the kids and that way you can work strictly on you. I had gone to work the day that she passed, and I knew something was wrong. I was exhausted with the stress. I had not been eating well. I'd not been hydrating well. I actually passed out at work that day, and
Mm.
my supervisor took me to the hospital. And my mom came and picked me up after they released me, and I spent the night with her. And I tried to call my then wife, and couldn't reach her. Well, that was of concern to me because I knew of her depression. Well, I called, we lived in Tennessee at the time. I called the local police department and asked them to go over and to do a wellness check. I was at my
Right.
parents' house an hour away, and I was not physically, I just gotten out of the hospital, so I couldn't really do it myself. They went over and the doors were locked. And in Tennessee, the laws at the time, I assume now, were that unless they see something nefarious on the inside, they cannot go in a locked house.
Mm.
So I said, okay, I'll be there first thing in the morning. And the police met me there at the house. We went in together. And long story short, I walked through our house back to our bedroom, and unfortunately, we found my wife dead on the floor. That
Mm.
She had taken a large dose of numerous different medications that she was prescribed, but those together. And she did leave a note. That wasn't very detailed. It basically, had some information saying to let the boys know that she loved them. Um, and yeah, at that time, my legs fell out from under me. My life fell apart, even more so than it already was. It was kind of in a shambles to begin with, but it fell apart even more. One of the first phone calls I made after I called her mom, of course, was to a great friend of mine in Indiana. His name's Steve Allen. I call him my Elkhart dad because we played music together when I was living in Elkhart working for the railroad, and he just became a great father figure mentor to me. And then luckily I had a community of folks there through my family and my church that my mom and dad actually attended at the time, because we never lived in that house again. That was that morning that we found her. I never stepped back in other than just to help a little bit of moving our belongings out of there. Um,
Mhm.
the boys and I stayed with my mom for a couple of weeks, my mom and my stepdad, and then we got our own apartment, lived there, and eventually moved into a small house. And then that connects in with whenever I, started seeing my current wife. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a trying couple of years, to have to go and sit down with, at the time, my oldest was 10, my second oldest was 7, and my youngest was, my third oldest was 4 at the time, and my youngest was 14 months. To sit down with my two oldest boys, especially Tim
Hmm.
and Aiden, and explain to them that their mom had passed on. Um,
Yeah.
that was tough. That was tough, and it was hard for them for a number of years, and it still is hard for them in a number of ways. They struggle with various things that we have gotten them counseling and things on. I think they're working through. They're both, good young men now, and they've got jobs and they're making their own way in life. But yeah, it was a rough couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that maybe veterans that are struggling with, the thoughts of suicide and things like that, maybe we don't put enough emphasis on is, what's left behind after,
Right.
which is huge. You said yourself, you struggled, the family struggled, and I don't think that's something that really, I guess, is in the forefront whenever somebody's in that state.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
you're exactly right. You don't think that way when you're in that state. I've never really been at the position where I felt like I wanted to, or was even really considering that. Um, but I can only imagine that someone that is, I'm sure that that is not something that enters into their minds. But I guess for those of us that are, that love those people, sometimes I look back at it, and I try not to blame myself, because I do believe that God works through all things for His good. But it's like, okay, what did I miss? What could have I done? What didn't I see, or what could have I done differently that would have maybe changed the way of that, or changed, that from happening? But I'm not sure there is anything. I think that,
Yeah.
again, everything happens for a reason, and a terrible, terrible happening that I would never wish on anyone. But, God taught me a lot of things through that as well. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about my kids. And even more so learned, that life still has to go on and you still have to trust him.
Yeah, very true. And faith is a huge factor. Of course, for you, it's a huge factor, right? And I think that there's a lot of individuals, especially military, we naturally, I don't know, we kind of stray, I think,
Right.
at some point in time. And I don't want to say the Marine Corps encourages that, or the
No.
military encourages that, but I think that is a reality. And for you, like, being able to demonstrate, and show through your works and the things that are going on is incredible. What would you have to say for those individuals out there that have struggled, and they're not really religious, right?
Right.
What do you say to those guys?
Well, I think, and I completely agree with what you said. I think part of the reason that the military, the Marine Corps, that we do is because we are trained to take care of whatever situation we're in.
Mhm.
All the services are, but specifically speaking of the Marine Corps, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that as I went through recruit training, as I went through all of my other training, that the Marine Corps is training me to be an independent thinker and to take care of situations as they arise, adapt and overcome, that whole
Mhm.
mentality. And I think sometimes inadvertently we let that get into our mental capacity beyond just military operations. And it
Yeah.
gets to be like, well, I don't need anybody. By gollies, I'm a United States Marine. I can take care of this.
Yeah.
As much as I do believe that's true to a certain extent, I believe that regardless of your faith, there has to be something else in life that that you can go to. I know a lot of people. Well, my mentor David Maslenka, he was not Christian, he was Buddhist. So he
Hmm.
sought out, and that is, of course, a type of faith. I mean, I I as a Christian or just as a religious and spiritual person, I can't quite conceptualize maybe someone that is atheist or agnostic, because that would, then it's like, well, what do you replace that with? And I'm, as a Christian, to me, that doesn't make sense. To them, I'm sure, though, finding something to help yourself realize that regardless of your faith beliefs, that you don't have to do everything. There are people
Hmm.
in this world that want to help you. And I think that, yeah, that it's hard. I think it'd be hard to take faith out of that. But if it is, if it is something for someone that is not of the faith, I think finding that person in your life or that group of people or that thing or whatever it is, like Alcoholics Anonymous talks about a higher power. Um,
Right.
for me, that higher power is Jesus Christ. For other people, it's going to be a different deity in whatever faith they have. And for people that don't have a particular faith, it might be something else. But realizing whatever that is that you have to realize that you can't do it all. Um,
Yeah.
as much as we want to think we can.
That's very true. Uh, so, as you're, because where are you teaching right now?
I teach at Dordt University. We are a,
Okay.
uh, a private 4-year, primarily undergraduate university. We do have about a dozen grad programs, but mostly undergraduate education. I'm the director of instrumental activities is my official title. I conduct the bands and the orchestras and oversee the instrumental music ed program.
Oh, wow. And what
I think you locked up on me. There we go. You're back.
sorry, man.
No, no worries.
I
What was the question again?
Sorry. Yeah. What advice would you have for young guys, that are going into college, getting ready for that? Would you recommend a similar path that you took, or would you say, hey, join the military and then do your degree, or how would you recommend?
Well, anytime anyone asks me about the military, one of the first things that I tell them is I think that military service is helpful for anyone in any profession at any time.
Yeah.
I highly recommend every young person, men and women, that if they desire or even if they only do 4 years, that service in any branch. Of course, I love the Marine Corps, and I always support those folks that want to go that direction. But all of our military services, they all have great things in different ways, and I think that you can learn many of the things we've already talked about from all of them. So I
Hmm.
highly recommend that. Um, if that's not something that maybe you're not qualified to do for, health reasons or whatever, then yeah, the route that I took was very odd. It's really kind of a around your elbow type of thing. Um, but everybody has a different route. The thing that I've learned is that don't pigeonhole yourself into thinking that if I don't do this route, if I don't I remember coming initially going into grad school and looking at those people in my profession that I really highly admire, like Jerry Junkin, the director of the Dallas Wind Symphony and at UT Austin, and looking at his career progression, or looking at my mentors that I studied with at the time and their career progression to where that they arrived at their university teaching positions, and thinking, well, if I don't do that, then I won't be successful. But that's not true. All of us have a different route. I figured that whenever I got my first gig, I'd be the assistant director of band somewhere doing the marching band and maybe conducting the second or third band. And luckily, here I landed where I'm the guy in charge, and I get the top ensemble, and I get to point the program in the direction that I think it should go. And who knows what the Lord's going to put in my path in the future. I think I'll be here for a long time, but you never know.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's just not pigeonholing yourself into thinking, well, I have to do this. I would
Hmm.
never want a student of mine to think, well, if I don't join the military and do at least 4 years, then I'll never make it to the same level that Dr. Rose did. Not true.
Hmm.
I overcame some odds that were against me in the route that I went, because I did finally realize that, hey, don't pigeonhole yourself. Do what you think you need to do in order to achieve the goals that you're trying to reach.
Yeah. Man, that's good. Good answer. I like that. So looking over your entire life so far, right?
Mhm.
What is some of the big lessons learned that you would want to let others know?
I think my biggest lesson learned, and I knew this before, but um, I did not know how to speak it to people, and that is
Hmm.
a very simple phrase that I was actually taught again by my mentor David Maslanka, and he told me oftentimes that we can't rely on inspiration fully. We can't rely on having the feeling of working hard because of whatever it is. What we do have to rely on is the fact that it takes hard work to get those things. And I
Hmm.
actually have a quote outside my door that one of my students a few years ago made a beautiful framed um, engraving of it that says, "Every day, show up, be fully engaged, and do the work." And every time I sit down at my computer to write music, every time that I step on the podium with my wind symphony, I remind myself of that specifically, because there are going to be times that you don't want to be there. Um, there's times that I sit down and the music just won't come, but I force myself to sit there. Even if I throw away every note I write that day, then I've gotten rid of those bad notes. The good notes will be there eventually. And I think that's something, I think, especially in the music profession, a lot of us think a lot about inspiration, and I think that's an important thing, but we can't rely on that. Be happy
Hmm.
when it comes. It's a great Christmas present. Wonderful. And I was inspired. When I wrote Heroes from the Sea, that was pure inspiration, complete and
Yeah.
utter inspiration. But when I wrote the rest of the symphony, there was a lot of hard work that went into that. Some inspiration
Hmm.
as well, but there were days that I wrote a lot of what ended up being good music, but it was like I had to work hard to get that music.
Yeah.
I think that's the same thing in everything we do. My band, just this past year, my Wind Symphony was invited as the featured college band at the Iowa Bandmasters Association. And we had applied for a number of conferences over the past year and not been selected. And I was kind of down on myself for that. Like, hey, what am I doing wrong? Because I'm leading these students. If
Hmm.
they're not achieving these goals, it's got to be because of me. And I just reminded myself, you know what, Onsby, just keep showing up every day. Keep showing up,
Yeah.
keep stepping on the podium, and keep doing the things that you know will make the band great. And that's what I do, and we eventually it works out. So yeah, that's probably my biggest lesson from my entire career, along with the number of other things that we've talked about with discipline and learning how to follow orders and just being understanding that your route may not be the same as others.
Yeah. Very nice. Um, I do have one more question for you if you don't mind, but what is because this is something that is near and dear to all Marines, and you have to
Mhm.
know these, from day one, it seems like. But what would you say your favorite leadership trait is?
Oh wow, let's see. JJ did tie buckle, huh? Whew. Gosh, because they're all important. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
reason they're. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm sure if I sat down and like made lists and all that type stuff that I'd eventually come to the same one, but maybe not. But I think probably judgment would be
Oh,
one of my favorites,
okay.
just because that we make so many decisions, hundreds of them every day that point us as well as those that we are in charge of or those that we're trying to teach or lead in various different ways.
Hmm.
And I have been the victim of both making bad judgment calls sometimes and the victim of others making bad judgment calls sometimes. But I've also been the recipient of both on the opposite side of good judgment calls that led to wonderful places. Um,
Hmm.
and I think, yeah, just being discerning. One of my colleagues here, our director of choral activities, one of the biggest things I admire about him is that he takes time to think about uh, his judgments. Like,
Hmm.
what are we going to do here? And he really thinks about it and is willing to take the time. That's hard for me. It's really
Hmm.
hard for me to not just make the decision. I think sometimes that's called for. There are times where you got to make the call.
Yeah.
I think more often than not, especially, I mean, I'm not in a war fighting capacity here, so I think that there are more times that I should make sure that I use some discernment and step back and think, okay, let's think about everything involved, because how that might come out in the moment when you look deeply into it, your judgment may be differently because you see those things that may come in the future. It's a balancing act of both. But yeah, I think judgment, again, if you ask me tomorrow, I might would say something different, because they're all important and they all have these peculiar things just like this that it's like, well, if we don't do this right, then it can have a massive effect not only on ourselves but everyone.
Yeah. That was good. It was a good answer. I was seeing if I could stump you on that one, but nope, that always sticks with the Marines. So,
It does, yep. I will remember that for the rest. I'll go to my grave if I am senile in my older years. I will still remember JJ did tie buckle and all the
yeah,
Marine Corps history and customs and courtesies that we've learned.
absolutely. Very important to keep those traditions and that type of stuff. Which tradition? Speaking of traditions, right? This is Thursday, so we're what 3 days away from
Yeah,
the Marine Corps birthday.
Sunday is
So
the 249th birthday. Yep.
that's right. And now, what are you going to celebrate? What are you going to do?
Oh yeah, we do. Of course, my wife is a Marine as well,
Hmm.
so we're steeped in Marine Corps love in my home. The last time I went to a ball or was able to go, I was going to try to make it to the East Coast Marine Musicians Ball this year, and it was just not. It did not work well with my schedule.
Yeah.
Last ball we went to, I actually lived in Columbus, Ohio, and I had worked some with the recruiting station there just to help them make some contacts at the university. And as a thanks, they invited us to the ball, which was a blast. We loved it. But the most fun Marine birthday balls I've been to, it's because that you know everyone there.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I wanted to go to the East Coast Musicians Ball is because I know so many of those Marines. My wife and I always celebrate together at home on the 10th of November. Typically, for the last couple years, I have a very close friend here. John and Kendra are their names. They're kind of mine and my wife's best friends that we get together with them frequently anyway. But on the Marine Corps birthday, we always make a cake and we always have a slice of cake. And we always, each of us have a shot of tequila and toast both the Marine Corps as well as all those Marines current and future. And I'm sure we will do that again Sunday evening.
I love it. I love it. It's a good way to do it right there.
It is. It really is. And my students all know that I'm a Marine. In fact, I'll have to share it again this year. Last year for the Marine Corps birthday, I actually recorded with my wind symphony. I put it out on their stands, rehearsed it a couple of minutes, and then we made a nice video recording of the Slow Marines hymn
Oh, very nice.
to wish my fellow Marines a happy birthday. My students all know that I'm a Marine. One entire wall in my office has all my Marine Corps hoorah stuff on it, and
Yeah.
it's absolutely part and parcel ingrained in what I am.
Yeah. Man, I love it. That's good stuff. Well, hey man, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
Thanks again. I mean, taking time out of your busy schedule to do this, it's much appreciated. And if there's anything else you want to leave the audience with before we take off, you're more than welcome. And then we can close it out.
Yeah, just keep showing up. Keep showing up. And of course, I am always one of the things I promised my mentor David Maslanka before he passed. He always offered me his time, and I try to tell everyone that I like to do the same thing. If there's listeners out there that are interested in music composition or being a band director, being an orchestra conductor, working for the railroad, the Marine Corps, whatever it is, they're always more than welcome to seek me out via email or phone, and I will always have time for those that want to take a moment to talk.
All right. And then now you have your music that's out there. How would people find that?
Sure, you can go if you want to purchase the actual music, like if for an ensemble, all of my music is available through Murphy Music Press. And it's just if you just Google Murphy Music Press, it will come up. There's a number of composers that he distributes for, but they have a tab on that says composers. Click on that and then find my name, and all of my music will be on there. Usually, once a piece premieres, like this symphony will premiere on March 23rd of this coming spring. It should be available within a couple weeks after that for purchase. Um,
Okay.
and if you have any problems finding it, of course, you can reach out to me at onsby.rose@dort.edu, or just
Hmm.
Google Dort Music, and you can easily find my email address there. So yeah, that's where you get my music. You can find some of it on iTunes. There's been a number of recordings. My first symphony is out there, recorded by the Royal Air Force, the Canadian Royal Air Force Band.
Oh, very nice.
Uh, Another couple of recordings of other pieces of mine, and then if you go to the Murphy Music webpage, there are recordings there for every piece that I've published.
Nice. Okay. Very cool. Onsby, thank you for coming on, man. You are a rock star, and I appreciate your faith and sharing that with us and all the things that you shared with us today. It was great hearing your story. Um,
Absolutely, it's my pleasure, brother. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi. To all the listeners out there, if you're struggling, you need help, anything like that, don't forget the VA does have some great resources. You can always dial 988 press option 1. You can text 838-255, or you can go to veteranscrisisline.net and click on that chat icon. Any of those options are going to put you in contact with somebody that can help you out. But remember, one veteran life lost is one too many. I care about you. Onsby cares about you. The whole veteran community cares about you. So please reach out for help. And if you're out there, you're not struggling, reach out to the buddies that you serve with, ask them how they're doing. If they need a helping hand, please give them that helping hand. All right, Onsby, one last time, thank you to all the listeners. Stay motivated, change your socks.